I thought it was just a family dinner. A chance to sit down, catch up, and feel included, just for once. But in the middle of a luxury restaurant, my sister looked at me and said something I will never forget. "Go find another table." Everyone heard it. No one stopped her. My parents laughed like it was a joke, and in that moment, I realized this wasn't about one dinner. It was about who mattered, and who didn't. Then the check arrived. And they placed it in front of me. That was the night everything changed. Because someone finally spoke up. "Go sit somewhere else." The words cut through the soft music and clinking glasses like a knife. This table is for real family. Not outsiders. My sister Lauren didn't even lower her voice. She wanted everyone to hear. We were at the Hawthorne Room, one of the most upscale restaurants in downtown Portland, the kind of place with linen tablecloths, crystal glasses, and a waitlist. Weeks-long conversations around us slowed. A few heads turned. Someone laughed. Not strangers. My parents did. My brother did. Even Lauren's husband smirked. Lifting his wine glass like this was entertainment. I stood there, clutching my purse, my face burning so badly it felt like my skin might crack. The chandelier above us glowed warm and golden, but inside, I felt ice cold. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 26 years old. I've been part of this family for 21 years. They adopted me when I was 5. And in those 21 years, they never let me forget one thing. I wasn't really one of them. "Lauren, that's enough," I said quietly, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Oh my God, don't be dramatic," my mother Elaine said, waving her hand dismissively. "We're just joking." "You're too sensitive." I knew that line by heart. Lauren had mastered the art of humiliation by the time she was a teenager. Now in her early 30s, she delivered cruelty with a smile and perfect posture. Growing up, she had the biggest bedroom, brand new clothes, private tutors. I got hand-me-downs and lectures about being grateful. She went to an elite university. I took out loans for community college. She was praised for average accomplishments. I was criticized even when I excelled. "Sit down, Emily," my father Richard snapped. "You're embarrassing everyone." So I sat. Because I always did. This dinner was supposed to celebrate Lauren's latest success. Some real estate deal funded, of course, with help from my parents. They were always helping Lauren. 3 years ago, when I asked for a small loan to expand my freelance design business, they laughed and told me to be realistic. The night dragged on. Lauren bragged about her new luxury SUV. My brother Mark talked about his promotion at an investment firm. My parents beamed, proud and engaged. When I mentioned landing a major client, a contract worth $48,000, my mother cut me off mid-sentence. "That's nice, dear. Mark, tell us more about your bonus." By dessert, I barely spoke. I stared at my plate, already bracing myself for the familiar numbness. Then the waiter arrived. He placed the leather check folder directly in front of me. I blinked. "I'm sorry," I said. "I think there's been a mistake." Lauren laughed. "Oh, no mistake. You're paying tonight." I felt my stomach drop. "Think of it as your contribution," she continued sweetly. "You're always taking from this family. It's about time you gave something back." Taking? The word lodged in my throat. Elaine leaned in, counting on her fingers. "The roof over your head. The food. The clothes. We gave you everything." My hands trembled as I opened the folder. $3, $1.80. They had ordered top-shelf wine, premium steaks, multiple appetizers, desserts just because they could. I can't afford this," I whispered. Lauren tilted her head. "Of course you can. You just said you landed a big contract." What she didn't know, or didn't care, was that money was spread over months, already allocated to rent, business expenses, and student loans I'd handled alone. Paying this bill would drain nearly everything I had saved. But I couldn't make a scene. Not again. So I slid my credit card into the folder. And smiled. The waiter walked away, my chest felt hollow. That's when a calm voice spoke from the end of the table. Everyone, stop. The entire table froze. My grandmother Margaret stood slowly. At 79, she was still elegant, her silver hair perfectly styled, her posture sharp and commanding. She had been silent all evening, watching. And the look on her face told me something was about to change. My grandmother didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Why, she asked calmly, is Emily paying for this dinner? No one answered right away. Lauren rolled her eyes. My mother shifted in her seat. My father suddenly found the tablecloth very interesting. It's only fair, Lauren said finally. She's always talking about how well she's doing now. My grandmother turned her head slowly. Is that so? She asked. Then perhaps you should explain something to me. She looked directly at my parents. You told me this dinner was your treat, she said. You even asked me which one I preferred. My mother laughed nervously. Oh, Mom, it's just easier to split things sometimes. My grandmother didn't smile. I didn't ask about sometimes, she said. I asked about tonight. The table went quiet. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me, like I was suddenly part of a performance I never auditioned for. Lauren crossed her arms. Why are you making this such a big deal? She snapped. She's not a child anymore. No, my grandmother replied. She's not. Then she looked at me. And she's not your wallet. Something in my chest tightened. My grandmother reached for the check folder and opened it herself. She scanned the bill slowly. The wine. The steaks. The extra desserts ordered just to try. Then she closed it. You ordered for celebration, she said. Not necessity. Lauren scoffed, so what? She owes us. We took her in. The words landed heavy. Owes us. My grandmother's expression changed, not angry, but disappointed. You didn't take her in, she said quietly. You chose to adopt her. My mother stiffened. That's different, she replied. She should be grateful. Grateful for conditional love. For humiliation disguised as jokes. For being reminded, again and again, that she was replaceable. My grandmother turned fully toward me. Emily, she said gently, did you agree to pay for this dinner? I shook my head. No, I said. I didn't. Then you won't, she said simply. Lauren laughed sharply. You can't be serious. My grandmother reached into her purse and placed her card on the table. I am, she said. And this will be the last time I watch this happen. My mother leaned forward. Mom, you're overreacting, she whispered urgently. Don't embarrass us. My grandmother met her gaze. You did that yourselves. The waiter returned, sensing the tension immediately. I'll take care of it, my grandmother said, standing. And she added, placing a hand lightly on my shoulder, will be leaving with me. I stood up slowly, my legs unsteady. Lauren stared at me, her face flushed with anger. You think this changes anything? She hissed. I didn't answer. As we walked away from the table, I heard Lauren mutter something under her breath, but for the first time in my life, I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't look back. Because something had shifted. Not in them. In me. My grandmother didn't take me straight home. Instead, she asked the driver to stop by her house. I think it's time you knew a few things, she said quietly, staring out the window. Her voice wasn't dramatic. It was resolved. Inside her living room, everything smelled like lavender and old books. She poured tea for both of us and sat across from me, hands folded neatly in her lap. Emily, she began, do you know why your adoption was handled the way it was? I shook my head. I was 5, I said. I just remember being told I was lucky. She closed her eyes for a moment. You were, she said. But not for the reasons they told you. Then she told me the truth. My parents had wanted to adopt, not because they were eager to expand the family, but because my father's business partner at the time believed it would improve their public image. Community reputation mattered. Appearances mattered. And later, when my father's business struggled, it was my grandmother's money that kept them afloat. Loans. Property investments. Quiet transfers that never made it into family conversations. They've been living comfortably for years, she said, on money they didn't earn. I felt dizzy. And Lauren? I asked. My grandmother sighed. She knows, she said. She's always known. That explained everything. The entitlement. The cruelty. The confidence that she would never face consequences. Then my grandmother slid a folder across the table. Inside were bank statements and legal documents. Emily, she said, the trust one set up years ago, it names you as the primary beneficiary. I stared at her. What? I wanted you protected, she continued. Because I knew they wouldn't do it. The room felt suddenly too small. The dinner tonight, she added, wasn't about money. It was about control. And they lost it. My phone buzzed. Messages flooded in. From my mother. You humiliated us tonight. From Lauren. You think Grandma saved you? Don't get comfortable. I didn't respond. Because for the first time, I wasn't scared of their anger, was curious what they would do once they realized the rules had changed. My grandmother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You don't owe them anything, she said. Not gratitude. Not silence. Not money. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, one thought kept repeating in my mind, they had spent my entire life reminding me I didn't belong. But now, for the first time, they were the ones on the outside. The fallout began the next morning. I woke up to 12 missed calls and more messages than I could count. My phone felt heavier in my hand, like it carried the weight of years I'd spent trying to be agreeable, and why Mother's messages came first. You embarrassed the entire family. Your grandmother was confused. You took advantage of that. Call me immediately, then my father. We need to talk like adults. This has gone too far. Lauren didn't bother pretending. Don't get comfortable. Grandma won't be around forever. I stared at that one for a long time. Then I showed it to my grandmother. She didn't look surprised. She always shows her hand when she's scared, she said calmly. That afternoon, my parents showed up at the house unannounced. My mother was crying before she even stepped inside. This is tearing the family apart, she said dramatically. All because you couldn't take a joke. My father stood behind her, silent, jaw tight. I stayed seated. I didn't make a scene, I said. I paid attention. My mother turned to my grandmother. You can't seriously be taking her side, she said. She's manipulating you. My grandmother didn't raise her voice. I'm taking the side of decency, she replied. Something you seem to have misplaced. Lauren arrived late, sunglasses still on, confidence forced. So this is it, she said. You've turned her against us? No, my grandmother said. You did that yourselves. Lauren laughed sharply. She's not even blood, she snapped. Why does she get anything? The room went silent. My grandmother stood. She gets respect, she said. Which is more than you've shown her in 21 years. Lauren's smile disappeared. You can't just rewrite everything, she said. She owes us. My grandmother looked at her steadily. She owes you nothing, she said. And from this moment on, all financial support ends. My mother gasped. You can't be serious. I am, my grandmother replied. And my lawyer agrees. That was the moment fear finally replaced arrogance. They argued. They pleaded. They blamed me, but none of it worked. Because the power they'd relied on for years was never actually theirs. As they left, my mother turned back one last time. "You'll regret this," she said. I met her eyes. "No," I replied quietly. "I regret waiting so long." The door closed behind them. And for the first time, the silence felt clean. The silence didn't last forever. But it lasted long enough for something important to change. Weeks passed. My parents tried reaching out through relatives. Lauren posted vague messages online about betrayal and entitlement. But none of it touched me the way it used to, because the fear was gone. My grandmother followed through on every promise she made. Financial support was cut. Legal boundaries were drawn. And for the first time, my parents had to face life without a safety net they'd pretended didn't exist. Lauren didn't handle it well. Her lifestyle changed fast. The luxury car disappeared. The designer bags stopped appearing in photos. She sent me one final message. "You think you've won." I read it once. Then I deleted it. Because this was never about winning. It was about being done. I moved into my own place a few months later, small, quiet, and entirely mine. I paid for it with my own money, the same way I always had. The difference was this time, no one could take it from me. I kept writing. Not about revenge. Not about them. But about clarity. About what happens when you stop begging for a seat at tables where you were never meant to be respected. Why grandmother and I grew closer. We had dinners, just the two of us, simple meals, honest conversations. No performance. No hierarchy. One evening, she looked at me and smiled. "You were never the problem," she said. "You were just surrounded by people who needed you to believe you were." That truth settled deep inside me. I didn't disappear to punish my family. I stepped forward without them. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn love. I was living without asking for it.